Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Is In. Today is the final episode of the 2022 Caregiver Weekly series in honor of National Family Caregivers Month. I am Brenda Johnson, an AARP volunteer on the Indianapolis team. And today I am joined by two of the directors of community engagement, Emily Gorman and Addison Pollock, who are with me.
Hey,
You want to say hi to everybody in the audience?
Hi.
Hey.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you.
Well, the team at AARP Indiana make volunteering fun and worthwhile. And the subject of caregiving is important because according to an AARP study in 2020, more than 1 in 5 Americans are caregivers. All of us probably know someone who is caregiving, and family caregiving spans across generations. These weekly shows feature caregiving experts from across the state of Indiana, and the objective of the series is to provide information, guidance, and resources to family caregivers, loved ones, and friends. If you were not able to join some of the previous episodes, they are archived in the video section of our AARP Indiana Facebook page. Before I introduce today's guests, I want to remind the audience that's watching us live that you can ask questions by typing them in the comments field. We will do our best to answer your questions during the program. And today I am excited that we're going to hear from several leaders who work on AARP's legislative priorities. Our first guests are Rhonda Richards and Emily Hethering. First, I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to end today's episode with Amber Marr, who is AARP's Indiana's State Legislative Director. First, let me introduce Rhonda and Emily, and then we'll get started. Rhonda Richards is currently a government affairs director at AARP. She advocates for older adults and their families in Congress and the administration. She works on issues including supporting family caregivers, helping people live independently in their homes, and communities in home health, in nursing homes, and other residential care. I'm blanking out. I guess it's like a disco thing. But anyway, she has successfully advocated for provisions in federal laws and regulations, including the Raise Family Caregivers Act. And prior to her more than 15 years of experience at AARP, Rhonda served as staff on the U.S. Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and of a former U.S. Senator. Emily Hetherington joined the AARP Government Affairs team in July of this year after interning with Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer Nancy Lamont's staff earlier in the year. Emily's portfolio includes veterans health, family caregiving supports, home and community-based services, and mental health care access. In October 2022, Emily completed her master's in public health from the Milken Institute of Public Health at George Washington University. Emily has experience working in private health care and in the military spouse community. With that, I'll turn it over to you both.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Emily and I are happy to join you today. We are going to tag team on the federal policy update regarding family caregiving, and I'm going to kick things off. I think we have some slides. There we go. And we can go to the next slide. Great. So family caregivers are really the backbone of the U.S. care system. They help their loved ones live independently in their homes and communities. There's about 48 million family caregivers caring for adults and about 53 million caring for people of all ages. And caregivers help make it possible for older adults, people with disabilities, and veterans to live in their homes and communities where they want to be. And most of us are, have been, or will be a family caregiver or will need help to live independently. Family caregivers provide about $470 billion nationally in unpaid care annually to their loved ones. In Indiana, about 850,000 family caregivers provide about $9.3 billion in unpaid care annually. Caregivers often face physical, emotional, and financial challenges in their caregiving roles, and they need support. They also help save taxpayer dollars by delaying and preventing more costly nursing home care and unnecessary hospital stays. Without their support, many older Americans would be forced to rely on the government for help. With common sense solutions, we can make family caregivers' big responsibilities a little bit easier. And now I'm going to turn it over to Emily. Next slide.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rhonda. So we have a couple of items here that we just wanted to make you guys familiar with. I'm sure you've already heard of these, but the first one is the National Strategy to Support Family Caregivers. This was part of the RAISE Act that was passed in 2017, 2018. And it's a huge document that contains, as you can see, hundreds of actions for all levels of government and community to implement to help support family caregivers. And this is a document that AARP has supported and championed. We were part of the various stakeholder groups that provided input and comments on helping to shape this strategy. And for us, we really want to focus on now implementing these various actions. And so this strategy is going to help kind of guide our caregiving priorities going forward. So if you have time, we have the link here tied to these slides. We can share that later, or you can just find it through a simple online search. But if you have time to just kind of look through some of these different actions that are available, particularly at the state level, it can be helpful if you are familiar with that, because like I said, it will kind of help us going forward to guide our caregiving principles and priorities. So I'll give it back to Rhonda.
Thank you. And as we think about the national strategy and AARP's family caregiving priorities, we have three guiding principles or areas of priority. First, make providing care and finding paid care easier for family caregivers, including through better access to resources, training, education, and inclusion in care, and more support at home. Second, alleviate the economic, financial, and other challenges directly associated with caregiving responsibilities through financial relief, workplace flexibility, and more access to respite care. Third, preserve and improve the general health and well-being of family caregivers through culturally inclusive caregiver assessments to identify needed support. Items in these priorities could be legislative, they could be funding for programs, or administrative action by federal agencies or state agencies, for example, or local government at the state and local level. We're going to discuss two examples of bills that fall under these priorities for AARP and also the national strategy. So back to Emily, and next slide.
And so the first example of a kind of legislation that we are working to enact is the Elizabeth Dole Home and Community-Based Services for Veterans and Caregiver Act. In the Senate, it's known as the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act. And this bill has really two main tenets that we support. And the first one is improving options, long-term care options for veterans, and increasing access to home and community-based services. So right now, home and community-based services are only reimbursed at 65% of the rate compared to institutional long-term care services. So we would like to see that moved up to 100%. These home and community-based services would be furnished through Medicare's program for all-inclusive care for elderly, and those geographic locations where that program is available. It also expands caregiver support by increasing the number of days of respite care to 30 days annually. And then it also would conduct an annual wellness check of caregivers. There's some other things within this bill, including a centralized website to help caregivers navigate home and community-based services and long-term care for veterans. And then it also has a pilot program that will address some of the home health aid shortages in areas where that is a real problem. Next slide. So this is just a bit of a timeline of the bill, just so you guys can know where it is in terms of of Congress and being passed. It was introduced in the House back in February. The Senate bill was introduced in March. It was passed out of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs in July. We do have the CBO score that came out just last week. So that's a good sign that there is potential progress on the bill. This could be something that may be passed in this lame duck session as we close out the year, but it's also something that, because of its bipartisan support, we could see it also being passed in the next session of Congress. So I just have listed here the various sponsors. We do have one sponsor from the state of Indiana, Representative Frank Mervan. I want to make sure I say that right. He has co-signed as a sponsor of the bill in the House, so we thank him for that. And if you want to find ways to support this legislation, you can always write to your members of Congress, take meetings with your members of Congress and ask them to sign on as co-sponsors of the bill. That's a great way to help support this kind of legislation. There's over 400,000 veterans in Indiana. So legislation like this allows them to age in place and stay in their community. And it's really important for them and for their caregivers. So I'll give it back to Rhonda to go over the Credit for Caring Act.
Great, thank you very much, Emily. And next slide, please. Okay, so here, family caregivers, as you can see, often have out-of-pocket expenses while they're providing care to their loved ones. You see a lot of numbers here, and this comes from AARP research on family caregiver out-of-pocket costs. As you can see, nearly 8 in 10, or more than 3 in 4 caregivers have regular out-of-pocket costs in terms of caregiving. And caregivers spend on average about $7,242 annually on caregiving costs, which on average is 26% of their income. And we use that measure as a measure of the financial strain on caregivers. And as you'll see from the numbers here, also Hispanic, Latino, and African American Black caregivers experience higher financial strain. Women tend to in general as well. And family caregivers need financial relief. Keep in mind that these out-of-pocket costs are on top of the value of unpaid care that many family caregivers are providing, that $470 billion that I talked about earlier. So family caregivers need financial relief, which is part of that second principle I talked about earlier, about alleviating the economic and financial challenges directly associated with family caregiving. And family caregiver tax credits were actually included in the national strategy to support family caregivers as a potential action for Congress to take. And this is one way to provide some financial relief to family caregivers. So I'm going to talk about a specific example of that. Next slide, please. So this bill, called the Credit for Caring Act, goes back actually a few Congresses. ARP reached out to Hill offices about the idea of a family caregiver tax credit several years ago, sought bill sponsors, and we worked with them on a bipartisan bill that became the Credit for Caring Act. It was first introduced actually in 2016, and each Congress since, most recently in May of 2021. As you'll see here, you can see the sponsors, Senators Ernst, Bennett, Capito, and Warren, and Representative Sanchez. And this is a tax credit, would be a federal tax credit that would provide up to $5,000, a non-refundable tax credit, to help eligible working family caregivers. And these caregivers can be caring for loved ones of all ages. You also do not have to, the person you're caring for does not have to be a dependent, and you don't have to live with the person that you're caring for to be eligible for this credit, unlike some other current provisions in law. The tax credit, after you have spent $2,000 in qualified expenses, you would be eligible for a credit on 30%, for 30% credit on other qualified expenses that you have after that, up to the maximum of the $5,000 credit. And the person that you're caring for need a certain level of assistance or care, help with certain number of daily activities, for example. And the caregiver, the person that you're caring for, could be a spouse or a number of other, in most cases, family relationships, but not all cases. And the caregiver needs to be working, meaning that they have to have at least $7,500 annually in earned income. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the bill. There are a number of different kinds of expenses that the tax credit could help offset. Things like care at home, like a home care aide, modifications to help the loved one stay at home longer, respite care to give the family caregiver a break, transportation costs for the person you're caring for, or travel costs for the caregiver if they're going to see their loved one and provide care if they don't live nearby, for example. It could help with things like assistive technology, adult daycare, and more as well. There also, the tax credit phases out at higher income levels as well, as you can see there, depending on if you're a couple or individual. And there are also provisions to help make sure that that the credit coordinates with other existing tax provisions, so that there's not double counting expenses if you happen to be eligible for more than one tax provision. And the bill, the concept of a caregiver tax credit has strong support across party lines among voters 50 plus, and AARP and many other organizations support the bill. A modified version passed out of committee in the House earlier this Congress, and the bill currently has more co-sponsors than it's had in prior Congresses, about 74 in the House and 23 in the Senate. We're not expecting action on this in the lame duck session of Congress, but we'll continue to work on financial relief for family caregivers in the coming year. Next slide. So we're happy to turn it back over to Brenda and others for Q&A.
Thank you so much. There was so much great detail and information that you covered there. So I want to thank you both for being with us today. I did just have a couple questions, even though you covered almost everything, just some things about that might impact us here in Indiana specifically. And so my first question is, what are some specific examples of how these policies can materially change the lives of caregivers and those that they care for? So in other words, what are the ways that these federal policies will trickle down and impact us here in Indiana?
Okay, I'll let Rhonda take this one. I think that Credit for Caring Act is a great way to support caregivers. So I'll let her take that one.
Okay. Well, thank you, Emily. Well, with a caregiver tax credit, it can help offset a portion of the caregiving expenses that a caregiver pays out of pocket for their loved one. So literally it can impact your pocketbook and give you a tax credit for the expenses, out-of-pocket expenses that you're paying to care for a loved one. And it's a modest way to help lessen the financial impact of caregiving and provide some financial relief for family caregivers. And in different other areas, it could mean making it easier to find resources that you need if you're a caregiver and you're looking for information or training or things like that, or better access to respite care to help give you a temporary break from your caregiving responsibilities, or in other cases, paid leave and whatnot. But in the case of a caregiver tax credit, it's really direct impact on your pocketbook.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's amazing. That one's in particular is very exciting, and interested to see where it goes. I did have a question about eligibility for these both of these federal policy that if their legislation, if they are passed and signed into law, who is eligible for these? I think with the Elizabeth Dole HCBS bill, you probably have to be a veteran, I'm sure. I don't know if you want to go into further detail about the eligibility requirements with that, and then also with the Credit for Caring Act.
Yeah, so with the Elizabeth Dole bill, yes, you have to be a veteran or a caregiver of a veteran to be eligible for that. And it's based off of a lot of the same criteria that the VA uses for their other benefits. Usually it's time and service, disability, means assessment, wealth assessment, those kinds of typical VA criteria that they use when they evaluate eligibility for these kind of programs.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then for the Credit for Caring Act?
Sure. And there are different eligibility criteria for the Credit for Caring Act. And of course, Congress can always change when they pass a bill. They can always change things as they go along in the process. I talked a little bit about some of the different eligibility criteria. But for example, for the Credit for Caring Act, you need to be working, so earning at least $7,500 annually in earned income. You need to be caring for a range of different potential family members, whether it's a spouse or parent or child or grandparent, or different relationships that the caregiver and the person that they're caring for can have. And then the person that they're caring for needs to need a certain level of assistance for a certain period of time, such as needing help with at least two daily activities. That can be things like eating, bathing, dressing, things like that. And then there are different kinds of expenses that are outlined in the bill, some of which I talked about in terms of the kind of expenses that are qualified that you could count the tax credit toward. Things like care at home, home modification, transportation, respite care, and a number of other different things. And you would need to document the expenses to show that you're actually paying the expenses and are eligible for the tax credit. And the person who you're caring for would need to show that they meet that level of care as certified by a licensed healthcare practitioner. So those are some of the examples of some of the kinds of eligibility criteria under the Credit for Caring Act.
Perfect. Thanks for revisiting those. Appreciate it.
That's awesome. So I imagine for the many caregivers out there, hearing about these policies and things that are happening must provide a real sense of hope for what's coming. But I wondered if you might be able to provide our viewers with some ways in which that's best for them if they wanted to get involved or to support any of these policies. What's the best way to go about doing that?
Yeah, definitely. So like I said earlier, right now, one of the best things that you can do for us is to write to your members of Congress or meet with your members of Congress and just communicate to them that you would like to see them supporting these pieces of legislation, signing in as co-sponsors. As I said, we already have one representative from Indiana, Representative Frank Mervan, who signed on in support of the Elizabeth Dole Act. So we thank him for that. But yeah, that for us, that's the best thing that you can do is just to voice your support for these and make sure that your representatives and your senators know that you would like to see them co-sponsoring these bills and signing on and giving their support to them.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
I agree with Emily. And caregivers, sometimes also, if you're interested in sharing your personal story of your caregiving experience, that can also be informative for lawmakers to get a better sense of your personal experience and how caregiving impacts you and why they need to co-sponsor the Dole bill or the Credit for Caring Act. And you can also share your caregiving story with AARP at aarp.org/caregiving. There's a place on there to share your caregiving story. And AARP uses those to help encourage lawmakers to take action on bills just like this.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yes. Yeah. Some of the most successful meetings we have with elected officials is when we have AARP volunteers who are telling their story. So we appreciate you plugging that. All right. Rhonda, Emily, anything else that you'd like to plug for us this morning? Any last words you'd like to say before we we let you go?
I just want to say thank you guys so much for inviting us to come and present on this. And these are pieces of legislation that, Rhonda and I and our whole office we're all very passionate about, and supporting caregivers and making sure they have what they need and, improving access to things like home and community-based services. So thank you for just giving us time to come and talk about this and present.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Right. Have a great day. All right, Emily, that was awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
I learned a ton.
Me too. This is definitely one that I'm going to be rewatching. So fantastic. So we're not going to bring Brenda back for introducing our next guest. We're just going to kind of seamlessly go right into it. So I'm just going to kick this off. Over the past 9 years, our colleague Amber Marr has served as the state legislative director for AARP Indiana, where she has built an innovative advocacy strategy focusing on increasing engagement, impact, and relevance for the state's growing 50-plus population. During this time, she has worked alongside volunteers in various capacities, expanding awareness around AARP issues, programs, and activities. She focuses on building relationships with community and policy leaders on a regular basis and organizes and maintains effective statewide coalitions to benefit the members of AARP. Prior to joining AARP Indiana, Amber worked in advocacy for the Indiana State Medical Association and as a legislative assistant in the Indiana General Assembly. So she knows a thing or two about the General Assembly and how it works, which we'll be asking her about. Additionally, Amber serves as a commissioner on the Indiana Commission for Women, which exists to voice women's needs, concerns, and challenges, as well as celebrate their successes and contributions to the state. She's also a board member of the Indiana Debate Commission, which remains the oldest independent and nonpartisan commission of its kind in the nation, putting voters first and by hosting free debates statewide. Amber graduated from St. Joseph's College in Rensselaer, Indiana, with a degree in social work. She calls Indianapolis her home alongside her significant other, Ryan. And when she isn't at the State House, you can find her running or camping. So without further ado, our friend and colleague, Amber Marr. Hey, Amber.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
We forgot to mention that you can find her on The Legislative Director talking about legislative things, which is another show on our mini channels, our web channels. So catch her there. Emily, do you want to take the first question with Amber?
Yeah, sure. So we just have a couple questions for you today just to learn a little bit more about what you've been doing in the State House and what's coming up for 2023. But the first question, we'll just keep it nice and simple. I'd love if you could tell us a little bit more about what you do at AARP Indiana, with a little overview on what the Indiana General Assembly is and how it functions.
Absolutely. So the Indiana General Assembly is essentially the legislative branch here in Indiana. We have 100 representatives and 50 state senators. Again, this is all on the state level. So you heard a little bit from our guests prior to about the federal government, but this is all here in the state. And so I am essentially at the State House. Every day when we are in session, Indiana is actually a part-time legislature. So we have a long session, which is our budget year, followed by the next year of a short session. We are entering into a long session year, so we will be doing a budget, which lasts 2 years. And like I said, those legislators in both in the House and the Senate, the Republicans have a supermajority, so there are 70 Republicans and 30 Democrats in the House, and 40 Republicans and 10 Democrats in the Senate. So during session, I am over there working with our legislators and advocating for policy on behalf of the 50 plus population. I hope I answered all of what you asked me.
No, you did. It was perfect. I'm sure it's very hard to keep it brief.
Absolutely.
That was perfect. Thank you.
Yes. So Amber, we invited you on because we wanted to tell the stateside perspective of caregiving issues and the policies that we work on. So can you just kind of walk us through what our main principles are when it comes to caregiving in the state? What are a couple examples of caregiving issues that we've worked on in the past?
Absolutely. So I will try to only mention a few. I know we are low on time, but we, as far as what we do on a state level basis, we are always protecting and supporting long-term services and supports and caregiver supports. That includes advocating for adequate state budget allocations in certain areas, monitoring the state's movement to managed care and the build out of that system and the implementation, which will eventually occur once that system is prepared and ready to take forth. And then also supporting the advanced practice registered nurses' ability to practice to the full extent of their license. There's many ways to talk about that, but essentially it is trying to remove the collaborative agreement between an advanced practice registered nurse and a physician. And I think oftentimes the collaborative agreement can be a little bit misleading. The medical profession always collaborates, no matter what profession you are in. However, this particular collaborative agreement usually has a dollar amount assigned to it where a nurse has to have a collaborative physician to be working alongside. That physician is only required to review 5% of their chart, and that is after care has already been given. And that's at any time throughout the whole year is what that review does. And so during the pandemic, that was actually removed by the governor so that everyone had access to healthcare during the very interesting time. And that has since gone away. And since we are one of very few states left that have not done this, we are looking to hopefully continue to fight for that ability for there to be access to medical professionals in any way, shape, or form, especially in rural communities. So hopefully we will see what happens, but we're going to be moving forward with that legislation in 2023. And we have tried in the past, but have been unsuccessful. Something that many people watching this might have heard. I am looking for, so there was just an announcement regarding a coalition that we have joined with many other business communities and just other medical professionals called Hoosiers for Healthcare Access. And that is one of the coalitions that will be moving forward and working together to pass this piece of legislation. And just really fast, in case anyone does not understand what managed care is, it essentially is our Medicaid system where our Medicaid agency will contract with managed care plans to deliver long-term services and supports. This is supposed to have better coordination, a better care opportunity for those individuals that are on Medicaid. And then also it provides, and what we have been fighting for, is to make sure that this system has caregiver supports included in it, because caregivers are obviously a huge part of this process and caring for their loved ones. And so we want to make sure that they have the resources that they need, that they are a part of this process, and that also that their feedback in, as they are managing the system, that they are able to provide that feedback so we can continuously improve. So just kind of that little bit of a background. While we're not in managed care yet, we will be in a few years. We're just currently going through the process and building that system out. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about during the pandemic with the authority of advanced practice nurses, registered nurses, that that was lifted for time being. So it's interesting that we have that sort of test case for it. So it'll be fascinating to see where this goes in the legislative session.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And you kind of already touched on it a little bit, but I wondered if there are any other pieces of legislation or issues that you're following into 2023 that might be great for our audience to learn a little bit more about what we'll be doing specifically in the state.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I kind of jumped forward on that one.
That's great.
Well, I did mention, although we have worked on the APRN, the Advanced Practice Registered Nurse Bill in prior years. We will be moving forward with that, as I mentioned, in 2023. But also, we will be looking at budget allocations that will be helping individuals continue to age in place. And that is around the managed care system. But while that is not a bill, we'll be looking at the budget to help workforce for individuals that, like I said, would like to remain in their home. And Indiana is a state where we have about 18% where individuals are receiving home and community-based services, and the rest of that is all facility-based care. So while nursing homes have a place and individuals do need that option, we are looking to rebalance the system. And what comes with rebalancing that is the fact that we do need more workers to be able to help individuals remain in their homes and communities. So we'll be looking at what allocations those will be and where those will be placed within the budget. And then also, some individuals might be aware that the Governor's Public Health Commission, which had been meeting, and they just released their report a few months ago this year. And while this does not look like it's going to directly impact caregivers, I think overall it will impact the way that individuals receive care in local communities and might be helpful for caregivers that are caring for loved ones. But this Public Health Commission came out and will be asking for approximately $240 million to place in the public health system that will eventually trickle down to local public health areas. And we're going to hopefully be asking for support from legislators to be including that in the budget. However, we'll see how that goes, but Indiana does need to ramp up their funding of public health in any way, shape, or form. So while we may not get the $240 million, we will be looking to support just additional dollars wherever we can.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Amber. Yeah, this is super helpful. And if folks want to get involved during the state legislative session, where can they go?
Yeah, so I'm sure they can visit our website, which is, Dan's got it up there, aarp.org/IN. We do lots of blogs. We will post about what we are following during session. And obviously you can watch the legislative director talking about legislative things, which
Perfect.
I realize we have not done one for a while, but I promise once session is back in, we will be back. And I will be talking about what goes on at the legislature, and it is a long session, so it will be a good long 4 months of chaos. So get ready.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Amber, thank you so much. We appreciate you coming on. This was great.
Thank you so much for having
you.
me. Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to kick it back over to Brenda Johnson to close us out.
Sure. Thanks, Emily and Addison. I'll end today's episode with a huge thanks to our presenters, to Rhonda, Emily, and Amber. We're grateful for your time. We're grateful for your expertise. Please give today's program a like if you learned something, and especially share this video, with your friends, with others that can take advantage of it, and with other videos in the series as well, with your friends and followers. Please share them. Spread the word about the caregiving resources here in the state of Indiana. You can learn more about AARP Indiana events, activities, and volunteer opportunities at aarp.org/IN. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.